Here are the terms for part 2 of War in the Ancient Mediterranean. And by the end of this presentation, you should understand first the Greek city-state system, the hoplite, the Greek phalanx and how it was used, the Battle of Marathon in 490 BCE, that is to say before Common Era. We used to say BC stood for before Christ, but BCE is a non-religious way of expressing the same thing. And then the Battle of Thermopylae, also in 480 BCE. Now, this is the region that would become classical Greece. And two geographical factors are key. First, Greece juts out into the Mediterranean Sea and is nearly surrounded by water. It has a shoreline of well over 8,000 miles, so that maritime traffic protected by navies was imperative. Second, it is hilly everywhere, and in many areas mountainous, with elevations of between 8,000 and 10,000 feet high in some cases. And this resulted in the emergence of compact, independent city-states rather than a large kingdom or empire. A single city-state was called a polis. The plural is polis. So polis, P-O-L-I-S, plural polis, P-O-L-E-I-S. These city-states shared a common language, religion, philosophy, customs, etc. They had all that in common. In that sense, they were all Greek, but they were politically distinct from one another. And what I have said to you so far is vital for you to know. This next part is background. I will not test you on it, but I want you to pay attention to it. Greek civilization had its origins in a civilization called Minoan civilization that existed on the island of Crete, which you can see in the bottom part of this map. It's the large island running east to west. And then, after the Minoan civilization, a people called the Mycenaeans migrated into what is now Greece, establishing a civilization that we can tell was influenced by the older civilization, possibly because the Mycenaeans invaded and conquered Crete. Mycenaean civilization reached its peak between 1400 and 1200 BCE. Then, for reasons we do not understand, it collapsed. And by 1100 BCE, Greece entered what scholars call a dark age. This dark age ended around 750 BCE. And we can tell from archaeological evidence that what we call classical Greece now had emerged by that time and was flourishing. We can also tell that sometime during the Dark Age, the city-state system had emerged. Earliest Greece had kings, but by this time, by the time you get the beginnings of classical Greece, you've got the city-state, you've got the polis, or to put in plural form, the polis. Now, this is what classical Greece looked like around 500 BCE. At the time, it was threatened with invasion by the Persian Empire. The two most important city-states were Athens and Sparta. Athens, the largest, had a population of about 300,000 and was organized as a democracy. It was the most powerful economically among the Greek city-states and had strong trading ties with other Greek city-states in the Aegean Sea basin, including some that were in present-day Turkey and were loosely under the control of the Persian Empire. Sparta was a monarchy organized as a military state. Agriculturally, it depended upon the labor of enslaved neighboring peoples called helots. That's spelled Helots. Spartan boys were taken from their mothers at age 12 and raised in military like barracks. At age 20, they entered service in the Spartan army. And at age 30, they were allowed to vote in the assembly and to live at home, but they remained in military service until age 60. The Greek military system was based on the hoplite, a heavy infantryman. Unlike armies we've already discussed, the hoplite was a member of the middle or upper class with a recognized stake in the outcome of any military conflict, and for whom military service was an obligation of citizenship, and who provided his own armor and weapon. The word hoplite comes from the Greek word hopla, Hopla, which referred to the assembly of armor and weapons. But this assembly is more commonly called a panoply. And this image is of a Spartan hoplite in panoply, but all Greek hoplites looked basically like this guy here. They had a helmet weighing 4 or 5 pounds, body armor protecting the chest, greaves protecting the shins, a shield called an aspis, and a spear, 7 or 8 feet in length. The total weight of this panoply, when it was all on the body of the hoplite, was between 50 and 70 pounds. Now, hoplites fought in a tightly cohesive formation, 8 ranks deep. Scholars call it a phalanx. Other civilizations used spearmen who fought in close ranked rows, but the Greek phalanx was unusually effective. It was organized in such a way that the shield of each hoplite protected the man on his right. It thus depended on confidence in the fellow next to you. But the fellow next to you was always from the same city state as you were, and probably someone you knew personally. And for that reason, the phalanx had strong cohesion. When city states fought each other, they did so in a formal way and usually agreed upon the time and place where the battle would be fought. Each side gave the other the chance to form its phalanx. Then they would advance upon each other slowly at first, then increasing their pace over the last 20 yards of ground. Each side hoped that the initial collision would knock the other side to the ground, but this usually did not occur. And both sides then used their spears to thrust at one another. Battles were very quiet, very violent, but quick. And when one side fell back, the battle ended. The victorious side did not pursue the other. They stripped the enemy dead of their equipment. The other side requested a truce to recover the bodies of their dead, thereby acknowledging their defeat. And thus, an entire war between two city states could be decided in a campaign lasting only a few days, with the climactic battle taking place in only a few hours or even minutes. Now, this was advantageous for both winners and losers because nearly all hoplites were small farmers with perhaps 10 acres of land. And to be assured of a crop, being planted, tended to, and ultimately harvested, they could afford to be away from their farms for only a few weeks at most. And this created a cultural preference for quick, decisive battle. In 490 BCE, the Persians invaded Greece, landing an army of about 25,000 ground troops and 1,000 cavalry at a place called Marathon, about 26 miles from Athens. They were confronted by only 11,000 Greek hoplites, mostly from Athens, but the Greek phalanx overpowered the Persians, ending the war on the spot. And the 26-mile run, called the Marathon, like the annual Boston Marathon shown here, gets its name from the battle. There is a legend that a messenger ran the distance from Marathon to Athens to deliver news of the victory, exhausting himself so badly that soon after telling the news, he collapsed and died. It didn't happen. It's a legend. But when the Olympic Games were revived in 1896, they included a long distance run inspired by this event and called the Marathon. Now, although a major victory for the Greeks, Marathon was not a significant check as far as the Persian Empire was concerned. The Persians returned 10 years later, this time on a much larger scale, and under the overall command of King Xerxes I, also called Xerxes the Great. Xerxes spent about 4 years making preparations for this invasion, and his intentions were well known. In 480 BCE, his army set forth from Asia Minor. The army size was estimated at 180,000 men, with a fleet of 600 triremes supported by 3,000 smaller vessels. And a trireme, we'll get to that later, but a trireme is essentially a war galley. If you look at the map on the left, you can see the Persian land force moving across an area called the Bosphorus, or the Hellespont, over to the European side, then going across Thrace, then Macedonia, and heading down into classical Greece, with the Persian fleet following alongside just off the coast in the Aegean Sea. So we're talking about 180,000 men making that march, supported by a fleet of 600 triremes, war galleys, supported by 3,000 smaller vessels that carried supplies and other kinds of things. Now, this Persian army could only be supplied by that fleet following along offshore, which forced it to remain close to the coast. And at a coastal pass called Thermopylae, a Spartan-led force held off the Persians for 3 days until a Greek traitor showed the Persians a secret path to the rear. Most of the Greeks then withdrew, but 300 Spartans, led by their king Leonidas, held the position to the last man. Now, this painting of Leonidas at Thermopylae is by Jean-Jacques David, a French artist who essentially made his career out of celebrating the French general and then Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. And the year in which he painted Leonidas at Thermopylae, 1814, you can see, was one in which Napoleon, beaten in battle and pursued by the armies of several nations arrayed against him by this time, was waging a defensive campaign to stave off complete defeat. And so David chose the bravery and sacrifice by King Leonidas and his 300 soldiers, the 300 Spartans, to inspire the French in this hour of maximum danger. And indeed, the Spartan stand at Thermopylae is the stuff of legend and endlessly retold. This inscription of the plaque commemorating the stand is also world famous, and it reads simply, "Go tell the Spartans, thou who passest by, that here obedient to their laws, we lie.